Hey everyone, this is Big Jeff McMichael with a little update on the Big Ten Huddle. So, about an hour ago, I recorded my Thursday night Big Jeff's Football Insights episode for the week. One of the topics I talked about for a little bit is the James Franklin firing, and then also the potential of Curt Cignetti being a candidate to be hired by Penn State. The news hit after I recorded that Curt Cignetti in Indiana did agree on a new 8-year contract running through 2033. It will average $11.6 million per year. And I show that last year he signed at the end of his first year at Indiana a $64 million contract, about $8 million a year. He was the 18th coming in this year, the 18th highest paid coach in college football. If my figures are correct, he should be now the third highest coach in college football behind Georgia's Kirby Smart at number 1 and Ryan Day at number 2. So wanted to give you that heads up. And the good news is during the podcast that you'll see following, I do talk about 4 reasons why Cignetti would not leave for Penn State or any other job. It's not just the Penn State thing. But then the news hit that Indiana did lock him up. To me, it makes a lot of sense. I know Paul Feinbaum already said Indiana made a big mistake. He doesn't understand any of the financials of Indiana, hasn't seen the financial impact of Cignetti. Frankly, as always, doesn't really know what he's talking about. So I think this is a very good move for Indiana. They've obviously seen huge financial benefits and obviously seen the benefits on the field. So that's an update. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Big Jeff's Football Insights every Thursday night on the Big Ten Huddle, brought to you by FanDuel. I'm your host, Big Jeff McMichael, and for the second week, I'm going to be riding solo without JR. That's the plan moving forward. We're going to let JR focus on, providing great content that he does every week for you. And we're not live. If you're tuning in Thursday night, not live. Still getting used to doing this on my own, so I kind of ask for your grace. It might not be perfect, and later we might move it back to live on Thursday nights. As a reminder, please like and subscribe to the Big Ten Huddle. Make sure to forward our content. And our goal is to provide comprehensive coverage, analysis of all Big Ten teams. That's kind of what makes us different in an unbiased way. My football insights are based on using data, not perceptions. I try to use data as much as possible, really to draw conclusions on teams and conferences. And we're going to often compare ourselves to the SEC. And to properly do that, you need to look at data, not go by perceptions. Just so another huge week in the Big Ten. So this is week 8, several games with playoff implications. Going to be a little bit different this week. The agenda, first, I am going to review for the 5 picks that I had last week, what I got right and wrong for the 5 games. Second, I'm going to give my quick thoughts on the James Franklin firing and the potential hiring of Curt Cignetti, or the talk of that at least, give my view on that. Third, we're going to look at midseason. Now that we're kind of halfway through the year, we're going to look at the midseason. I'm going to put all 18 teams into 6 tiers and really talk about who are viable playoff candidates. We'll go through that. And then finally, I'm going to do my 5-game predictions as I usually do. So, and just to remind people, I will have my full write-up article on my predictions on bigjeffsfootball.com by Thursday night, by tonight. And then also follow me on X at Big Jeff's FT Ball. So Big Jeff's FT Ball on X, really, really appreciate that. So first, let's bring up my results from this past week here. So went 3-2 this week. And won my Lock City game. My Lock City game was Ohio State over Illinois. It makes me, for the year, I'm 17-18, about 500 record, and 3-1 in Lock City. Other thing, just to remind people of, I'm not choosing the 5 games involving Big Ten teams that I feel most confidently in winning. I'm choosing the 5 games based on who I think are the most compelling games. And therefore, sometimes they're harder to pick. And of those 5 games, I will give my Lock City pick. I'm not saying it's guaranteed. All that's saying for Lock City is of the 5 games I'm choosing, it's the one I have the most confidence in. So I had said on X that week 7 in the Big Ten was really kind of narrative defining week for the Big Ten. And I thought we were going to get definitive answers on these 3 questions. So the first question was, is Indiana a true top 5 team? And I think by winning, 30-20 at Oregon, breaking their long home winning streak, I think we definitively got the answer that yes, they are a legit top 5 team and national title contender. Second question was, is Illinois a real playoff contender or just a good team going up against Ohio State? I shouldn't say a good team, a very good team. And I think by losing at Ohio State at home 34-6, they were down 20-0 really late in the second quarter there. We definitively know that Illinois is, while very good, just they're not a playoff contender. Their schedule might allow them to be still talked about as a playoff contender, but really I think that answered the question. And then the third question was, with Michigan playing at USC, who is going to set themselves up with a strong playoff push the last half of the year by winning that game? USC answered that question by pretty much thumping Michigan 31-13 and announcing themselves as a clear playoff contender. So I want to do also just a quick review on what I got right and wrong on individual games. Let's just start out with not just what I got wrong, but what I totally bombed on, and that's choosing Wisconsin to beat Iowa 20-16 as a 3.5-point underdog. It would have been a mild upset, quite frankly, but it actually turned out that Wisconsin got destroyed 37-0 in an embarrassing fashion at home. I had felt going in, Hunter Simmons, who's their new quarterback, he looked pretty good against Michigan. And I felt Wisconsin really fought hard against Michigan, had a chance in that game. And that told me they haven't quit yet on the season. So if you're playing a rivalry game at home, you're going to come out fired up versus Iowa, right? Well, maybe not so much. The other thing is we didn't know if Mark Gronowski, the Iowa quarterback, was going to play. He was questionable for the game. And Wisconsin has a great run defense matching up well with Iowa wanting to run. So I thought that was a good matchup. And it just turns out none of that mattered. Simmons had a terrible game. In the second and third drives, he threw really bad interceptions. It led to Iowa being up 17-0. And Wisconsin's just a fragile football team. They really just don't believe. They probably don't believe in the coaching staff anymore. Just a side note, my brother, who's 6 years older than I am, he's a Wisconsin grad. He was at the game. I mean, he basically left early in the third quarter. They went to watch the Brewers play. From what I understand, after jump around the third quarter, most of the students left. So really just a bad deal here. Fickle has totally lost this team. And it's just a matter of when. Frankly, I think likely after the Ohio State game, there is a bye for Wisconsin. That's the perfect time to do this. So it gives whatever interim coach a couple weeks to try to get things in order. A good win for Iowa, though. Any Big Ten win on the road, Big Jeff will say, is a good win. And even with Wisconsin struggling, it's still a very good win. I also lost the Nebraska game. I had them to win and cover the 6.5 over Maryland, predicting they would win by 10. Nebraska did win, but they only won by 3, so 34-31. So I got that one wrong in the Brown row there. The bad thing is quarterback Dylan Raiola threw 3 interceptions. That's never excusable, especially for a second-year starting quarterback like him. He did overcome it with 4 touchdowns, but he can't do that against better teams. For Maryland, after their 4-0 start, they've lost 2 straight home games while leading in the second half. So just really crushing, not as much as the Washington game where they led by 20. But, Washington and Nebraska are legit top 25 teams in my book. So I just think, on the positive side for Maryland shows how really talented this young team is. They just need to figure out how to close out games. And I really do think Mike Locksley's job is very safe. If you would talk about firing him, you risk losing that young talent, and that just wouldn't make any sense for Maryland. So he is safe. So what did I get right in week 7? Talked about Ohio State as my Lock City game. They beat Illinois 34-16. They covered the 15.5 points. I had predicted 34-14, so I was literally nailed the Ohio State score, off by 2 for Illinois. And I had said to win this game, Illinois needed at least to be +2 in the turnover column. They had entered the game +7, and really that's 5th in the nation. It's one of their keys to success this season. But in this game, they were -3 in the turnover. They gave short fields to Ohio State, which is just killer. Ohio State's 2 TD drives in the first half were 35 and 26 yards. So that led Ohio State to being out to 20-0 first half lead. Illinois outgained Ohio State 295 to 272. I heard some people talking about that and everything. It's really misleading. They had short fields, and then once they get the lead, Ohio State, basically what they're doing in Ryan Day, he knows if you make the playoffs, which they obviously look like they are going to do, you have to stay fresh, keep your team healthy, and he's just not wanting to run many plays to keep his team from getting hurt so that they're ready to go all out once they get to the playoffs. That's why they're, running really slow tempo offense. I think that slow nature of their offense, frankly, is impacting the running game. I think if they ran up tempo, that would get teams a little more tired and they would have more success running. But the formula is working. So, Ohio State fans are complaining a little bit. Ryan Day has a plan. Believe in him. He just won the national title last year. The other thing, I was impressed with Illinois, though, their fight. They defense played a lot better. They're 16th, came in the game 16th in the Big Ten. I'm still, relatively impressed with Illinois. They are who they are. They're clear top 25 team. They're just not a top 10 team. And that's okay, right? Because many teams in the Big Ten would wish to have the success Illinois is having. The second right call, Indiana getting 7.5 points at Oregon. Now, I called Oregon to win by 7. Didn't get that right. But I thought, Indiana would cover that 7.5 points, which they did. So I won that game. Obviously, Indiana winning by 10 was the biggest result on the weekend. This was such a huge game for Indiana from a perception standpoint. There were still holdouts that thought last year was just a nature of a bad schedule, and it was a bad schedule, and it was kind of fluky. I thought Indiana last year clearly was top 25, but you could make an argument, were they top 10? Maybe not, because they didn't do well against Ohio State and Notre Dame, of course, in the playoffs. So this really says they're a legit top 5 team, national title contender, and really any reasonable college football expert are saying the same things. Only like your people that are trying to grab headlines, like Paul Feinbaum, might say, "Yeah, I'm not sure of Indiana." As an Indiana grad, and I'm an Indiana grad from 1990, just still, I had doubts on Indiana's offensive line going against Oregon's defensive line, but they stood up really well in the trenches, and in fact, they beat Oregon in the trenches, and that was probably really the surprise. So just a huge game for Indiana based on perceptions. And frankly, with Penn State's troubles, the fact that Indiana looks like the real deal, that's a big deal for the Big Ten, because if Indiana wasn't looking like that and Penn State not looking like that, that really would be a major hit for the Big Ten. For Oregon, it does reveal concerns. I listened to all these different podcasts, including Oregon's, concerns about their linebackers. They're not nearly athletic as Ohio State or Indiana, frankly. Their rushing offense is a concern. It struggled. And then, clearly they're missing that second high-level receiver. Evan Stewart got injured. They have a very great receiver in Decorian Moore, young freshman, but really it helps to have that second, real good threat. And so that's a concern. And then Dante Moore looked like a young quarterback, but he is a young quarterback. So to expect him to look great every game, I think, is unrealistic. let's not overreact. Indiana's really good. I think Oregon clearly has top 5 level talent, and teams get better throughout the year. I think that will be the case for Oregon as we move forward. And then the third game I got right, I had USC not just covering 2.5 points over Michigan. I had them winning by 10. They won by 18, soundly beating Michigan 31-13. I have to say, I had some Wolverines fans coming at me on X, really getting on me with the pick and like I don't know what I'm talking about and everything. They really took offense with it. I didn't think going into the game Michigan was a bad team. I just think USC is much better than people think. I was really disappointed in their performance and losing at Illinois. I thought they were better than that, and I thought that was just a nature of traveling and really coming off the Indiana loss. They probably underestimated Illinois, frankly. And then really the USC dynamic offense going against Michigan defense, I really thought that was a great matchup for USC. The other thing that gave me pause, though, the ability to stop Michigan's big play runs and Justice Haynes. And USC was able to do that. Haynes had a solid game, 51 yards on 10 carries, but then he got hurt late in the first half. And once that happened, frankly, looking back, that was really the chance Michigan was going to beat USC kind of went with that injury to Haynes. He's just a difference maker. And USC really, the story of this, they really out Michigan here. They bullied them in the trenches. They have got Michigan 489-316. Even more impressive, USC ran for 224 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, while Michigan only had 109 yards rushing on 3.5 yards per carry. And USC was down to their third string running back on it, all the more impressive. USC quarterback Jayden Maiava, much more experienced than Bryce Underwood with way better weapons, and it really showed in this game. So the win puts USC at 5-1, great place in the playoff picture. For Michigan, with 2 losses, they're 4-2. And despite the 6th easiest remaining schedule, I feel they're probably not in the conversation anymore. They would have a lot of work to do to get back into the playoff picture. So those are my thoughts on my kind of what I got right and wrong for week 7. All right. The second topic I want to talk about, quick thoughts on James Franklin's firing and the talk of Cignetti. I just think a lot of the coverage here on this topic has been misinformed at best, and in some cases flat out wrong at worst. I listen to different Penn State podcasts pretty consistently. I have a very good close friend who's a Penn State graduate, goes to 2 or 3 games a year. He was at the whiteout against Oregon. He's very well connected with many other rabid Penn State fans. Anyone who says they are shocked at this firing doesn't know this program at all. Those who say this year actually also was national title or bust for Penn State, meaning if Franklin didn't win it all, he might not get his job. Yeah, they expected they had a chance to win it all, but that wasn't required for them to feel good about Franklin going forward. So, anyone who says also that this firing shows that the next coach must win a national title or they're going to lose their job, relatively quickly, that's also, I think, false. And again, yeah, they do want to be in contention with, they'd like to win it, but here's the truth. And when I say this, it does not represent all fans, but I think the vast majority of fans of Ohio State, the firing here was not based on Penn State losing 3 games in a row. This firing has been building for a long time. And sure, Penn State fans, again, I just said they would love to win a national title. Of course, that's the case. But really what they want is to be relevant to the national title conversation every year and win their fair share of big games based on the talent they have, right? Instead, they've won almost no Big Ten big games under James Franklin. And then, knowing how terrible his record is in top 5 against top 5 teams. So, if you look at this year, if Penn State would have beat either Oregon or Ohio State and then made the playoffs, and in the playoffs, if they beat another top 5 like team, and importantly, a name brand team like Alabama, Miami, or Georgia, most Penn State fans would have called that a good season still, a really good season, successful. And I don't think they would have been like, we need to get rid of Franklin. They would have been like, okay, he can win big games with the right talent. And I know Pat Kraft has said in the press conference he expects Penn State to win championships, but that's what all athletic directors of big time programs say. I don't believe it's, win a championship or bust for a coach. It matters how you look, and are you winning big games, your fair share of them, and are you making runs at winning a championship? That's what they want. So, another talking point that was annoying to me, how do you fire a guy who just made the college football semifinals the year before? He was really close and has won a ton of games. Penn State fans, they're not stupid. They know they got extremely lucky last year with this super easy draw that Penn State got. Penn State lost to Ohio State at home again last year. Then in the Big Ten championship game, they lost to Oregon again. And yes, they beat SMU at home. That SMU team was not that good. Top 25, that's it. Then they beat Boise State at a neutral site. But those aren't marquee names, and those aren't legit top 10 teams, let alone top 5 teams. So they knew they were lucky to be there that far. So the whole idea of James Franklin, one game away and everything, it was from bitten fortunate with how that played out in the playoff last year. Also, those who felt Franklin, who should have been kept the rest of the year and given a chance to right the ship, they have no idea how toxic things had become. My friend said that the UCLA loss, basically any remaining remnants of people who supported Franklin were gone. So he pretty much knew he was done then. And then Penn State has 2 home games left. Do they really want to have 2 home games where fans, a good portion of them, are chanting fire Franklin, fire throughout the game? I mean, it's just an embarrassment to the team. So this had reached the tipping point. It was a long time coming. It's clear Franklin's not a big game coach. And so they had to make the move. And yes, they understand there's a risk that they could, start only go 8-4 and everything. That's a chance Penn State fans are willing to take. I mean, they don't want to hear about that. And they understand that's a risk. Just on getting Cignetti, to hit on that, absolutely. I'm an Indiana fan, but it should be their number one target. They should be talking to him. He should be for sure the number one target. There's no doubt, especially coming off that big Oregon win, right? Just don't want to go too deep on this, but I think there's 4 factors that would make this really tough for this to happen. One, Cignetti knows that Indiana, he's doing things that no one felt possible, and it's worth more to his reputation and his legacy than going to a blue blood like Penn State and winning it. He would be expected to win it for. So what he's doing at Indiana, he could go down as one of the greatest coaches of all time, even if he doesn't win a title, because Indiana was one of the worst teams all time in Division I and FCS, right? So that's something there is, your legacy. And it's not the case if you went to Penn State or Florida even. Number 2, he has great financial support and resources at Indiana, and he can continue to win big there. They're willing to spend big, and there's less pressure there. If he has a clunker season, quote, clunker, and goes 8-4 at Indiana, people aren't going to be questioning whether he's the right guy. They might at Penn State or Florida, for example. And then Indiana is going to pay. He's going to get another raise. He's going to get Ryan Day type money, probably $11 million a year. I think he's making $8 million something. You're not going to outpay Indiana here. Third, IU is going to make the playoffs and maybe make a run here. You're going to have to wait till into January to get him. he's not going to leave Indiana when he's got a chance to do something special. There's no way he would do that like in December. So the quarterfinals are in December 31st and January 1st. The semifinals are January 8th. Again, you're getting into the time period where, the early signing period is December 4th. So from a recruiting perspective, waiting for Cignetti has some strong ramifications. And then fourth, Cignetti's going to want to bring his entire staff with him. That's one of his keys to success. And I think it's been understated. When he came to Indiana from James Madison, he brought his full staff, and all of them understood exactly what Cignetti expected, so he could hit the ground running. He didn't have to hire a new offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, kind of get them in sync with what he expected. And then, of course, he brought the players over too, which was very helpful. But the coaching staff, I think, was even bigger key than the players, I would argue. He's going to want to do the same wherever he goes. But for Penn State, it means you're probably going to have to help buy out those assistants. They have buyouts at Indiana. Jim Knowles, what do you do with his contract for $3? I guarantee you Cignetti doesn't want Jim Knowles running his defense. He's going to want Brian Haynes, who showed, and that's not a shade at Jim Knowles. He's still a good coordinator, really good coordinator, but he's going to want to bring his own people. So Penn State's going to have to eat a bunch of money in addition to paying, $11 million or whatever to get Cignetti. I just don't think it adds up. But yes, they should go after Cignetti anyway. I just don't see it happening. All right. So third topic, going to zoom out. This is my second table. Pop it up here for all you folks. Let's kind of do a mid-year review and put teams in the categories. I think this table is pretty cool. For those who are listening, I'll try to give you the detail. I put the Big Ten teams into 6 categories. I give their record in parentheses, and then the FanDuel national odds to win the national championship are also listed here, which I think are pretty revealing. So, the first category I call national title contenders. I put 2 in that category. Really, I would put Oregon clearly as a title contender, but I think Indiana and Ohio State temporarily at least have separated themselves from Oregon, so I put them in their own category. Ohio State is the favorite in the Big Ten and the favorite overall to win a national title. Their odds are plus 330. Clearly Ohio State can do it. No one's been doubting that. Indiana now with the Oregon win is put in that same category, and it's just so impressive. 6-0 as well. They're most likely, a lot can happen still, to meet in the Big Ten championship. Indiana has the second best odds at plus 950 to win the national championship. The second category, I put Oregon in its own category. I put playoff bound, but work to do. I do think Oregon is going to get back into that top category and be, among Ohio State and Indiana. But there are some concerns, and let's face it, after they beat Penn State barely, but clearly looked like the better team, you do wonder, I would say, Penn State at that time had better confidence going into that game. So teams evolve. Not all wins are the same based on where that team is during the year. So I still consider that a great win. But Oregon, I would just say, has work to do. The third category, I call this playoff hopefuls. So I'm putting USC, Washington, and Nebraska. All those teams are 5-1 right now. And I do think, in general, if you go 10-2, you're likely to make the playoffs. I have questions about Illinois there, though. We'll get to them in a minute. But USC would lead off there. They actually have the 4th best odds at plus 6,000 to win the national championship. We're going to talk about their game with Notre Dame in a little bit. But clearly, the win over Michigan positions them well to make the playoffs. Washington is plus 17,500. That's actually behind Michigan. Michigan has better odds to make the national championship, but Washington has the 6th best odds. Again, I definitely think they should be making the playoffs if they go 10-2. We hit on this later, but I'll just say it now. It is totally ridiculous. I agree with JR and Zach. For them not to be in the top 25 is stupid. It's just dumb. Most people would say that. I don't know what AP voters are here. I don't get too worried about the AP polls. Things usually work out in the end, but this is one that I'm pretty ticked off about. It was pointed out by JR and Zach. If this were an SEC team, you can guarantee they would be, probably, 15th or something like that. I mean, they would be way up there. I do think Washington's going to be there, though. If they beat Michigan, bam, they'll be there. And then Nebraska, 5-1. Many more questions on Nebraska. They have the seventh best odds, plus 25,000 to make the playoffs. So they're right as well. By the way, Oregon, I don't think I mentioned it. It's on the screen. Plus 1,200 to make the playoffs. Third best, of course. So the fourth category, I'm calling top 25 teams. I'm putting two teams in there. Illinois, who's 5-2. And then Michigan, I have them in red font. They're 4-2. I think some feel that maybe they don't even deserve top 25. I know you can make that argument. We'll find out when they play Washington this week for sure. Vegas still likes Washington, though. I said earlier, plus 12,500 to win the national championship. Fifth best odds. So, better than USC. Or sorry, not better than USC, but better than teams like Washington and others. Illinois. So, some think they can, if they win out, they can still make the playoffs at 10-2. I think every team except Illinois, I could say that would probably be the case. I think it's pretty hard to lose to any team. I know Indiana's real good. You can't lose to a team by 53. You just can't. So Illinois would have to start destroying people, frankly. Vegas odds has them at plus $100,000. So if you're an Illinois fan and you still believe, put $10 on them, man. You're gonna make a bunch of money, like $1 million, I guess. Yeah, you'd make $1 million if they win the Natty. So good team, but just not great. Then the middle of the road team. So there's a bunch here. Iowa plus 40,000 odds to win it. Minnesota plus 100,000 odds. UCLA's listed. And Maryland, believe it or not. So UCLA's 2-4. I put them as a middle of the road team, but these are all teams that have a good chance to make a bowl game. I could have made that the category. UCLA, they don't list odds because there's no way they'd make the playoffs at 2-4. Northwestern at 4-2. Again, not even listed for odds by FanDuel. Maryland is in this category too. They're 4-2. Their odds are plus 100,000. So bottom line here, you've got Maryland and Minnesota with the same odds as Illinois to win the national championships. But all these teams are like kind of right in the middle and with a chance to move up for sure. The final category I'm calling bottom feeders. There's 5 here as well. For now, I have to put Penn State. Now, Vegas, Penn State's 3-3. Vegas lists their odds at plus 100,000. So again, if you think maybe Penn State just turns things around, place a little money on them. Rutgers is here. Purdue at 2-4. Michigan State at 3-3. Losing 3 in a row, though, not looking good. And then, of course, Wisconsin at 2-4. I do have Wisconsin as the worst team in the Big Ten, which is just amazing to think about. I've seen many Wisconsin games in person, and they've won every game except versus Ohio State in overtime. So, Wisconsin's like 9-1 in games I've attended in person. So to see them as the last team in the Big Ten is really incredible. So these are the bottom feeders for sure. They're going to have to really fight to make a bowl game, and that includes Penn State for sure. All right, so let's go to the next category. And this is our final topic, I should say, not category. This is talking about the games of the week here. So you can see the 5 games I've listed. It's going to be Nebraska versus Minnesota, Michigan versus Washington, Oregon versus Rutgers, Iowa versus Penn State, and UCLA versus Maryland. Going to go in detail on all 5 of those. Did want to speak to, though, why I decided not to cover a couple games. Ohio State at Wisconsin, Indiana at Michigan State. Huge favorites here, like in the upper 20s. I just think if it's that big of a spread, it's not that interesting of a game. So I don't really want to predict it. I don't suggest you bet games with that big of spreads. The backdoor covers come into play too much. I did leave out Notre Dame at USC only because I wanted to have the Big Ten on Big Ten games. But obviously this is one of the big ones. Just a huge game. And I can't understate how big this is for both programs. Notre Dame, it's basically a play-in playoff game. Win it, and they're in great shape to go 10-2. If they go 10-2, they're going to make the playoffs. Sorry, Notre Dame haters, if you don't like that. Lose it, though, and they're out. I mean, they're done. They are out at 10 and that at 9-3. For USC, this would be Lincoln Riley's first true statement win at USC. Put them in great shape for the playoffs. I mean, it would be huge. If they finish 10-2, I really think they would be a lock with a win at Notre Dame. I think 9.5 points, which Notre Dame is favored by, I think that's a lot. I would take USC in this game. I like Notre Dame to cover. Wouldn't be surprised if USC wins this game, but USC hasn't won versus Notre Dame in quite a long time. Notre Dame's still a really good team. They're battle tested. I'd like that in teams, but I would, if you're betting this, take USC to cover. 9.5 points is a lot, and USC has a lot of firepower. They're playing with a lot of confidence. All right, so let's get into our games here. First one, number 25, Nebraska. 7.5 point favorite over Minnesota. Over under is 47.5. After the big win at Maryland, just kind of the background, Nebraska's in a great place record-wise at 5-1 overall, 2-1 in the Big Ten. And then the win over number 24, Cincinnati, is a good one. The committee's going to really care about that. Cincinnati's playing very well. There are concerns for Nebraska. Dylan Raiola clearly has made great improvements in his second year starting, but he had 3 interceptions versus Maryland. I know I mentioned that. But in the Big Ten, in 3 games, he's thrown for 8 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And this is after the 3 non-conference game, 8 TDs with 0 interceptions. So now that he's against tougher teams, he's throwing the ball away. He cannot do that. That's a major concern. None of the playoff-worthy potential teams are doing that. And so that's a big concern. The second thing, the Husker run defense now ranks second to last in the Big Ten, giving up 151 yards per game. They just played the worst rushing team in the Big Ten in Maryland, and they gave up 130 yards to Maryland. So that's not good. I do have concerns about that. We saw that against Michigan, right? And then despite only allowing 1 sack to Maryland, still near the bottom in the Big Ten, they're giving up 16 sacks for the year. So in the trenches, there are concerns. Minnesota 4-2 overall, 2-1 in the Big Ten. They came back against Purdue, but the reality is their last 4 games have really been a struggle. They have not looked good. Against Purdue, the Gophers were outgained 456 to 262, and they only had 30 rushing yards. And if they didn't win the turnover battle, they won it 4-1. So they're +3 against Purdue. They would have lost this game. So really, Minnesota's struggling here. So Nebraska 2-4 against the spread this year. Minnesota only 1-5 versus the spread, and they've lost their last 4. So let's get into the reasons why Nebraska can cover. I've got 3 reasons. Nebraska's biggest strength of their great pass defense, it matches up really well with Minnesota's one-dimensional pass-oriented offense. And I think that's going to limit Minnesota's scoring. Now, I did write this exact same statement last week when Nebraska played Maryland, right? And then Maryland did have success not only running, but passing the ball versus Nebraska. Malik Washington, 27 for 37, almost 250 yards and no interceptions. So, I still think Nebraska has a really good pass defense, but maybe not as great as we thought it was. Nebraska still ranks first in that category, while Minnesota only rushes for 112 yards per game. So the bottom line is I think Nebraska is equipped very much to contain what Minnesota does best on offense, which is the passing game. Number 2, why they like Nebraska here. Unlike Minnesota, Nebraska's offense has good balance. I love teams with good balance, harder to defend. They have more answers for what other teams are trying to take away. And the running game for Nebraska is improving week to week. So, just some stats. Nebraska's 5th in the Big Ten, 450 yards per game, 2nd in pass offense, 11th in rushing. But their averaged 6.2 yards per carry against a good Maryland defensive front. And Emmett Johnson is really coming on. He rushed for 176 yards, 8.4 yards per carry against Maryland. So that 6.2 yards per carry is by far the best in the 3 years that Matt Rule's been at Nebraska. And then Emmett Johnson, he's 2nd in the Big Ten in rushing, behind only Justice Haynes. So he's got 650 yards on the season. So really, Emmett Johnson emerging is the real positive there to kind of outweigh the concern of Arella throwing away interceptions. And then just in general, Nebraska has more momentum on the season and likely more confidence. That's the third reason that Minnesota has. Why take the points with Minnesota? I have 2 reasons. Despite Minnesota's relative struggles, they're still tough at home. They've won 5 of their past 6 Big Ten games at home, even though they haven't looked great doing it. This year, they're 2-0 in the Big Ten. And last year, they won 3 of their last 4, including almost beating Penn State 26-25. So that was almost 4 out of 4 in the Big Ten. They're even tougher at night, and this is going to be a Friday night game. So that's something to hang your hat on. The second reason they like Minnesota against tougher defenses, Dylan Raiola is more likely to throw interceptions and make poor passing decisions. And Minnesota is the type of defenders that can take advantage. So I gave the stats already about Raiola, throwing interceptions, 5 in Big Ten games. Minnesota is +5 in turnovers, and they just got 3 against Purdue and have playmakers like Coy Parrish, the great safety. He already has 6 career interceptions, so that bodes well for the Gophers. Nothing else really sticks out to me for the Gophers, though. I only giving 2 reasons to like them. So let's make a call here. Both teams have been terrible against the spread, combined 3-9 against the spread this year. So something's got to give. On the road against a well-coached team, and with a pretty high over-under, I just think Nebraska as a 7.5 favorite is just too many points. I do like Nebraska to win the game here. So I'm going to call it Nebraska 24, Minnesota 20. And my confidence here is medium, but I just think 7.5 points is too much given Minnesota's pretty tough at home, and the road environment too is a factor here. All right. Game number 2, Michigan -5.5 against Washington. 50.5 is the over-under. Michigan, we talked about them, 4-2 overall. Just really disappointing loss to USC. They were mostly physically beaten in the trenches, which is very concerning. And it's really a missed opportunity because, the Wolverines' schedule really has not been that hard this year, and it doesn't remain that hard. They have Ohio State, of course, at the end of the year, but that is at home. And really, they have the 6th easiest remaining schedule in the Big Ten. So not going to pull the white flag on them, but if they would have beat USC, they were in great position. Washington, in the other hand, 5-1 overall, already described, really bounced back nicely from Ohio State loss, win at Maryland, and then last week a 19-point win over Rutgers. So really impressive. We already talked about Washington should be a top 25 team. They are a top 25 team. They have the talent for that. They have the 5th easiest remaining schedule in the Big Ten per Pro Football Focus. Remaining tough game against Oregon. So if they can get through this game, man, they look pretty good to potentially be that 4th or 5th Big Ten team to make the playoffs. For the year, Washington is 3-3 against the spread, while Michigan is 2-4. I think it's pretty interesting. ESPN's SP Plus metric has Washington and Michigan right next to each other. Washington's 21 and Michigan is 22. So these teams really are, this is, pretty close as far as their potential capability, I think. Let's get into reasons why Michigan can cover that 5.5 points. 2 reasons. So Michigan's offense, believe it or not, it's mostly statistically better than even the 2023 national title team, believe it or not. They're definitely better than last year's team. And I think they can score enough. If they can get a better defensive effort, Michigan definitely can cover this 5.5 points. Offense has not been the problem for Michigan this year. It's been the drop-off in the defense that has been the issue. And frankly, with all those first-round draft picks from the defense, Michigan, if anything, they underperformed last year. And really, you're seeing the impact of that. They're still good, but not nearly as good. So here's just some stats. My article, I maybe didn't mention this yet, but the full write-up of all these picks are going to be on bigjeffsfootball.com in an article, including a table comparing Michigan to last year and the title team from 23. But it's pretty interesting and dramatic. Rushing stats per game for Michigan, it went from 157 yards per game last year for the Wolverines. This year, they're averaging 216 yards. So last year, they were 73rd in the nation in rushing. This year, they're 19th. Believe it or not, 3 years ago, that team, the championship team, was only 54th in the nation in rushing offense. The other thing is total yards per game. It's gone from 286 yards per game last year, which was 129th in the nation, to 418 yards or 49th in the nation. Now, some people might be like, oh, that's only 49th, no big deal. For Michigan, that is a big deal. The national championship year, they were only 67th ranked in the nation in total yards. So, Michigan's offense, while not looking real dynamic and everything, and it's a lot through Justice Haynes, credit to them, in explosive runs, and then the running ability of Bryce Underwood, they're able to put up yards, and they're pretty good in points per game as well. Not 29.5, much better than last year's 22 points a game. They rank 60th in points per game. So obviously that probably reflects on need to be better in the red zone. But really, it has not been an issue for Michigan as far as the offense as much as people would think. Number 2, there is a travel impact when Big Ten teams have to play road games traveling multiple time zones. That's certainly the case for Washington. Last year they were 0-5 on the road, and that include Eastern time zone losses at Rutgers, at Iowa, at Indiana, at Penn State. Now, this year, the Huskies beat Maryland, but they sleptwalked through the first half. And as I talked about, if Maryland had a running game, they would have held on to that lead and Washington would have lost. So the other factor here, in addition to their struggles on, traveling, Washington had an early week 3 bye. So this is the 5th game in a row the Huskies have played. I think they're going to be pretty mentally drained that included game against Ohio State that was emotional, the comeback over Maryland, and that included travel. So this game is at noon. When these Eastern time zone games is what matters too. That's 9 a.m. Washington time. I think the travel, 5 straight games, early start, I think that's a really big deal here. Now let's talk 2 reasons why to like Washington. And I really like Washington a lot. Similar to USC last week, Washington has a balanced and dynamic offense. Not quite as much, I don't think, as USC, but going against a Michigan defense that clearly is not as good as the last 3 versions of the Wolverine defenses, I think definitely that's going to give Michigan trouble in this game. So just to speak to Michigan's, defense, they gave up 31 points to USC last week. Easily could have been much worse. They gave up 489 total yards to them. We mentioned the 224 rushing yards at 6.2 yards per carry. That's pretty scary stuff there. And, Washington has a dynamic running back themselves and Jonah Coleman, right? We all know that. Michigan's 10th in the Big Ten in total defense, 10th in pass defense, and 6th in running defense, and then 8th in scoring defense. All these are mediocre figures. It really speaks to how this Michigan defense is not what you would come to expect. Very subpar figures. Washington, on the other hand, that balanced attack, 3rd in the Big Ten in total offense, 4th in pass offense, 5th in rushing offense. Jonah Coleman, 5.4 yards per carry, 11 TDs, leads the nation in rushing. And then Damon Williams Jr., ESPN has the 4th best quarterback rating in the Big Ten, 10 TDs, 1 interception. So I don't think Michigan's going to get turnovers here. Washington's going to be very difficult for Michigan to contain. Number 2 reason why Washington can cover that spread of 5.5 and win the game. The key to beating Michigan is containing the explosive running game of Justice Haynes, and Washington's defense statistically looks like they can contain that rushing attack. So Haynes is 5th in the nation and leads the Big Ten in rushing, 705 yards per game. I personally feel he's the best running back in the nation. And then Michigan's offensive line is pretty average. The issue is, and everyone should know this, Haynes is currently questionable for the game. Sharon Moore is optimistic he can play. So this is another really big variable here. And then Washington has the 2nd best run defense, only giving up 83 yards per game. And Pro Football Focus really likes their defensive front. They rank well. So all that speaks to, Justice is a big variable here, but that could be favorable. There are signs that Washington is capable of containing Michigan's running game. So this is a tough call here with a lot of variables. How does Washington handle the travel this week? Does Michigan come out angry, after that bad loss to USC? And is Justice Haynes going to play? Sharon Moore, if he loses this game, he's going to find himself on the hot seat. I mean, they'd be looking at a 2nd major disappointing season. The only thing that saved last year is beating Ohio State. Yes, the bowl win over Alabama is great, but they still finished 8-5. You're a blue blood. That's just not acceptable. So, I just look at, in this one, my gut call, travel for Washington, 5 straight weeks on the road. This might be surprising to some people. I'm taking Michigan to win, but cover the 5.5. So I'm going Michigan here, 31, Washington 24. Confidence is low, but I just really believe kind of the intangibles here favor the Wolverines. And it's desperation mode. Please, teams don't always play great in desperation mode, but they are at home. So I like that for Michigan. All right, game 3. You got Oregon, number 8, given 17.5 to Rutgers. People are expecting fireworks in this game. FanDuel, 60.5 is the over-under Oregon, 5-1. We know we talked about them. The key question here is how do they bounce back traveling, 3 time zones to play a struggling Rutgers team after a surprising loss to Indiana. Rutgers, meanwhile, reeling after 3 straight losses. They've lost by 10, 3, and 19 points. Last week at Washington, of course, 3-3 overall and 0-3 in the Big Ten. And unfortunately for them, really have a tough schedule remaining. So it'd be great if they could pull out an upset here. Oregon, 4-2 against the spread. Rutgers is 3-3. I think it's interesting. ESPN's SP Plus has Oregon ranked number 2, right above Indiana. Oregon's ahead of Indiana, but SP Plus factors in last year's results a lot in recruiting. Rutgers is rated 50th in SP Plus, which is 12th in the Big Ten. Okay, 3 reasons Oregon can cover here. Oregon is one of the few Big Ten teams who has not struggled traveling multiple time zones east to play conference games. So that's a factor that's much less likely to impact them in this game. So last year, Oregon traveled east, beating Purdue by 35. They beat Michigan by 21. They only struggled against Wisconsin and won by 3, but they still won. And that was late in the season after they were pretty fatigued. This year, they traveled to Northwestern, won by 20, won really easily. And then, of course, had the huge 6-point win in the whiteout game at Penn State. So if Oregon doesn't cover, I don't think this is going to be from travel. And the other thing is, the game is at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. So when you play out east matters. That's going to be 3:30 Pacific time. It's not sleepy time for the Ducks. Number 2 for Oregon, to like them. Rutgers has the Big Ten's worst defense statistically, and it's against Oregon's balanced offense, ranked 4th in the Big Ten. So I think there's little chance Rutgers is going to be able to contain Oregon here. Oregon's 4th in the Big Ten in offense. Really good balance, 251 passing yards per game versus 230 rushing yards per game. That's about as balanced as you can get. And then Rutgers dead last, like I mentioned. Last in pass defense as well. 14th in rush defense. It's just pretty ugly there. They don't do anything well, and that's a bad formula defensively against a team like Oregon. And then number 3, Oregon's strength in pass defense matches up well against Rutgers' offensive strength, which is their passing game. So that's strength on strength. Oregon's defense overall is 4th best in the Big Ten, but their pass defense is where they thrive. They're 2nd in the Big Ten, giving up just 139 yards per game. So Nebraska's number 1 in pass defense, Oregon's number 2. And all Oregon's defensive backs rank really well per PFF. The only exception is safety Aaron Flowers for Oregon. And that's going to be important. Rutgers offense, 6th in the Big Ten in total offense, 3rd in passing, 309 yards per game in passing for Rutgers. They have a deep and strong wide receiver core we're going to talk about here. But Oregon certainly has, statistically, looks like they could hold down that strong Rutgers pass offense. Why take the points with Rutgers? One big reason. I usually don't have one reason, but here's one. That offense, right? Really good, experienced quarterback, Ethan Kaliakmanis. He has great weapons. So they are, despite Oregon being pretty good in defense and that strong pass offense, I do think they're going to put up some points on Oregon. The offense has thrived at home for Rutgers. They've averaged 46 points per game in 3 non-conference games. And even against Iowa, their one game at home in the Big Ten, they put up 28 points. And we know that Iowa defense is legit. They held, Indiana to just 20 points. Great weapons, 3 guys with at least 394 yards receiving, led by Ian Strong. He has 537 yards. And then Kaliakmanis, 11 TDs, 3 interceptions, career high 66% pass completion rate. He hasn't looked as sharp in the Big Ten season, but still played well. And the other thing that bodes well for Rutgers, they have a really talented running back, Antoine Raymond. He averages 5.5 yards per carry, including he's had 250 yards rushing the last 2 games at Minnesota and against Washington. So on the road, rushing for 250 yards is very impressive. So that gives Rutgers hope in this game. So what's my call? Oregon giving 17.5 points on the road. To a strong offense like Rutgers, that's a lot to ask. Let's work backwards in cases like this. I think that's a good thing to do. Let's start with thinking, how much do we think Rutgers is going to score in this game? Oregon giving up 23 points per game in the Big Ten play. I think Rutgers know to win this game, they're going to have to score a lot of points and outscore Rutgers, so I expect an aggressive game plan. I'm going to call them to score 24 points. Rutgers score 24. So Oregon would need to score 42 to cover, and I do think they do that. I think they're going to get 45. And the other factor here in thinking how much Oregon will score, Dan Lanning knows they need style points now that they've lost to Oregon or to Indiana. So if Oregon gets ahead, sometimes Lanning will kind of like, put it back down into third gear. I don't know if he's going to do that in this one. I think they know they need to, get style points and more confidence too, to know that, we're a type of team that can win it all. So I call, after initially I can tell you choosing Rutgers to cover that 17.5, I'm calling now Oregon to cover that. They're going to win and cover. Oregon 45, Rutgers 24, confidence medium. All right, 2 more to get to. Game 4, Iowa against Penn State. Iowa favored by 2.5 points. Per FanDuel, 39.5 over under. So there's not going to be projected fireworks in this one. Penn State goes in 3-3, as we all know, 3-game losing streak. The bigger thing for this game, they lost senior quarterback Drew Aller out for the season. As a dad who has a son playing football in high school, my son was out 3.5 months. He is back playing. Injuries are horrible. I feel so bad for this kid. He's a good kid. I mean, Drew Aller played his butt off for Penn State. He just might not have had certain passes that he was really good at. I just think, unfortunately for him, this was just a tough thing for the injury and just a tough end to his career. The thing is, too, the big question, what are you going to get out of interim coach Terry Smith that was named this week? Will it be, let's leverage all this talent we still have, change things up and go out and win out and get aggressive? Or is it more like, let's just play with pride, right the ship and salvage the season? If I'm Terry Smith, I say, let's just have fun again. Let's ball out. Let's get aggressive. Let's go win out, man. Why can't we? We've got the talent to do it. This Penn State team's not confident. They're not having any fun. That's what I'd be doing if I was Terry Smith. Now, whether that works or not, I have no idea. Iowa, on the other hand, much different place. 4-2, coming off embarrassing their hated rival Wisconsin in just a rivalry game, 37-0. Given what Indiana just did to Oregon too, the 5-point Iowa loss to Indiana looks better. So Iowa seems to be getting better as the year moves along, and the improvement of Mark Gronowski, it's gradual, but it's still good to see. This is interesting. So Penn State, maybe not surprising, 0-6 against the spread this year, have not won against the spread. Iowa is 4-1-1, and they've won their last 4 in a row against the spread. So it really shows the momentum that Iowa has. SP Plus for ESPN, Penn State still rated 18th, believe it or not. Iowa's 25th. So why take the points with Iowa? 2 reasons. Number 1, Iowa's run-oriented offense and strong offensive line matches up extremely well with the Penn State's defense, Penn State's been shockingly weak against the run. So let's get into that. With the 109th toughest schedule in the nation, according to PFF, that's what Penn State has. Here's where the defense stand in total yards. They're 29th in the nation and 6th in the Big Ten, giving up 302 yards per game. But again, this is against a pretty weak schedule overall. Rushing defense, Penn State is 70th in the nation, 15th in the Big Ten, giving up 144 yards per game. That is pretty incredible, incredibly bad for Penn State, and bad news against a team like Iowa. Iowa, meanwhile, averaged 184 rushing yards a game, 6th in the Big Ten, 4.7 yards per carry. Importantly, a deep running back room. They have 3 running backs with at least 198 yards rushing. Kamari Moulton is back and healthy. He had 96 yards against Wisconsin, 6.4 yards per carry. So I've talked many times about how highly ranked Iowa's offensive line ranks in PFF. That's a very tough matchup for an undersized Penn State defensive line. So that's a big one for Iowa. Second reason to like Iowa. Their defense is as stingy as always. And unless we see a very different Penn State offense, which is possible, they're going to be starting an inexperienced quarterback. So the Nittany Lions are not going to be able to score many points, in my view, unless they turn things around against Iowa. Iowa's 3rd in the Big Ten and 8th in the nation, allowing 247 yards per game only. Plus, Iowa's 1st in the Big Ten against the run. They only yield 79 yards per game. So Wisconsin was 1st against the run. Now Iowa is, after shutting down Wisconsin totally the last game. So that's a matchup against Penn State, starting an inexperienced quarterback, wanting to rely on the run game versus, aggressively passing. And the other thing is that Evan Grunkmeyer, who is the new quarterback for Penn State, he's going to be going against Iowa's famous Norm Parker-led, zone pass defense. So for inexperienced quarterback, that's not a good place to be. Parker is going to be trying to disguise coverages. If Penn State can't run the ball, they're in deep, deep trouble in this game. Why Penn State can cover? I'm only giving one reason here. With all these changes, I'm not going to give a bunch of reasons, because who knows what you're going to see from Penn State. Any team starting with a relative clean slate like this, going to be hard to predict. And we've seen this, but that is a reason to potentially like Penn State. That is the one reason is, let's have fun. Let's go for it. Let's, it's us against the world. Let's go 9-3 and win out. We can do it. We've got the talent to do it. So we've seen it before. UCLA, of course, Deshaun Foster got fired. They lost to Northwestern. Then they shocked Penn State, went on the road, drubbed Michigan State, and they look like a totally different team. And when an interim coach's name, it can ignite a fire under a team, a new voice, a new philosophy, can deliver different results. Ethan Grunkmeyer, too. Maybe he has a different skill set than Drew Aller. I haven't done any film study on him, but maybe he can throw the deep ball better, right? To stretch the defense, allow more room to run the football, because less safeties in the box for Penn State. So who knows from that? Maybe he can better take advantage of Penn State's wide receiver group. And then just, having a more aggressive game plan in the pass game, potentially, even though I don't think Penn State's going to do a ton of that. But Katron Allen, lean on him. He's averaging 6.7 yards per carry. Nick Singleton's only averaging 3.7 yards per carry. This is a major thing with Penn State fans. They're going nuts about this. Why are we keep on giving the ball to Singleton when he hasn't done anything this year, and Katron Allen is still a beast? And so I think that's what you're going to see in this game. You're going to see a ton of Katron Allen, and that is the smart thing to do. And maybe against a more one-dimensional offense in Iowa, maybe Jim Knowles simplify things enough for Penn State's defense to thrive a little bit more. So something to think about. So what's my call on this one? As I've said, just a lot of unknowns here. Maybe Penn State taps into their potential. I would not rely on that, though. More reliable is to assume Iowa is going to play a hard-nosed defense, control the game with their offensive line, Penn State's weak offense is a good matchup for the Hawkeyes. And then, Penn State's undersized defensive line, not good. So I like Iowa to win and cover the 2.5 points. I'm going with Iowa 24, Penn State 17. I put my confidence on this medium. I would bet this one. I just think the variables here add up and the momentum add up to Iowa with a win in the cover over Penn State. All right, final game here, folks. UCLA, 3.5 points giving to Maryland. 52.5 is the over-under per FanDuel. This is the UCLA team we were expecting all year. They've won 2 in a row. Talked about them just thumping Michigan State. In that game, they outgained the Spartans 418 to 253. So just really impressive. Just a reminder, before the season, ESPN SP Plus had them 50th in the nation. Lindy's Magazine had them 57th. Their over-under was only 5.5. So, they've got talent on this team. And great to see that the new coach, Mr. Skipper, has gotten the most out of this talent. UCLA averaging 40 points per game in the last 2 games. And Nico Iamaleava, I can't say his name worth a damn. We know him as Nico. Thrown for 5 TDs with no interceptions, looking like the number 1 transfer portal get that he is. Maryland's reeling. Talked about the 2 losses. Maryland fans should still feel optimistic, though. Real interesting to see how they respond. This is a big variable. Traveling to the West Coast for a road game to a hot UCLA team. Maryland's 4-2 against the spread. UCLA is 3-3 against the spread, but UCLA has covered 3 straight games. Remember that. Okay, why UCLA can cover? 3 reasons. West Coast, number 1, West Coast travel factor for Maryland. They've yet to play on the West Coast this year, and they only played last year once, losing by 21. That favors UCLA. Big Ten teams, the more they gain experience traveling those long time zones, then, they can get better at it and more used to it. But Maryland, that's just not the case with them. They just don't have a lot of experience with this. Number 2, why liking UCLA? Maryland struggles under Mike Locksley in October. It's a real thing. I said this last week. I'll say it again. After the loss last week, Mike Locksley, since the start of the 2023 season, he's 1-7 in October. That's not against the spread. That's 1-7, 1-loss record. So really bad for Locksley in Maryland. Then number 3, the last 2 games, UCLA has totally unlocked their run game. So that's really something underestimated. That is the key to them looking like such a different team. So since Foster was fired, Tino Sinceri, the offensive coordinator as well, statistics, you almost don't want to look at the overall stats for UCLA for the year because it'd be deceiving. You want to look at the last 3 games under this new regime. Their run game is totally different. Their run offense has moved up to 9th in the Big Ten. The last 2 games, they've run for 269 yards. And 2 games ago against Penn State. And then last week, 238 yards. Both games over 5 yards per carry. It really blows their averages out of the water. So UCLA is a different run team now. Nico has helped with that. 128 yards against Penn State. But against Michigan State, Nico only ran for 3 yards. So 235 yards were gained by UCLA's running backs. Jalen Berger has emerged, had 89 yards last week. Javian Thomas, good get from California as a transfer, had 54 yards. So just huge kudos to New Bruins offensive coordinator Jerry Neuheis on this, unlocking UCLA's true potential. Why take the points with Maryland? 2 reasons. I just bragged about UCLA's renewed running game, but Maryland's young defensive line is really good. So Maryland's still really capable of containing, I think, UCLA. They're going to need that to happen. They only give up 113 rush yards per game. That's about middle in the Big Ten. And then only 16.8 points per game overall. That's 5th best in the Big Ten. So Maryland's strength is in that young defense. It gives them a chance in this game. Number 2, Maryland's offense, still too pass heavy, but their Big Ten worst rush offense actually showed signs of life against Nebraska. They had 130 yards rushing. Sophomore Nolan Ryan ran for 62 yards, 5.6 yards per carry. That gives them some hope. If they can run the ball some, that means Malik Washington, who's been really good and effective in the past game for Maryland, can be even more effective. A little bit of balance will go a long way to helping Maryland. So what's my call here? Bottom line, probably not surprising. I really like this spot for UCLA. I don't like it at all for Maryland. Their confidence can't be too high. Beyond what I've already covered, be the first game since the home opener, also against Utah, that the Bruins will be in front of a positive and relatively excited home crowd. I'm not saying this is going to be the big home crowd. We know it's not going to be, but they're going to get a lot of support here. It's going to be a pretty fun environment there, and that's a positive for UCLA. So put me on the Jerry Neuheisel train, baby. I'm calling UCLA to win and cover. I'm making this my Lock City pick of the week. UCLA 31, Maryland 24. Obviously, my confidence is high. If that is my Lock City pick of the week, I have on the screen here then my total picks here and who I'm choosing. To reminder, taking Minnesota, Michigan, Oregon, Iowa, and UCLA as my Lock City pick of the week. All right, well, that's the end, folks. I know I covered a lot, went a little longer than I would like. We'll try to keep it an hour normally. Thanks for listening. Remember, full write-up on bigjeffsfootball.com. Be sure to like and subscribe to the Big Ten Huddle. Good luck to all your teams this week, and bye for now.